Mahesh Jaising. He's partner at Deloitte India, joining in on the show. Mahesh, good to have you on board. Clearly, it seems that this PLI push has been a great impetus to a number of sectors. I just wanted to understand, do you think that by and large the expectation is that increasing the outlay of the existing PLI schemes, extending it to more components and an extension perhaps of the low corporate tax rate of 15% for new manufacturing units would really benefit a number of sectors like consumer durables and consumer players as a whole?
Absolutely. I think Vinny summarized it well, and thanks for having me over. There are a couple of parts to it. I think while we will certainly see a lot of announcements around, or we expect to see a lot of announcements around Make in India, and whether it's on the corporate tax side or the customs side, on PLI, one needs to watch because traditionally that doesn't necessarily get fully announced on the budget in the budget speech. To remember or to remind ourselves, it is indeed the sponsoring ministries that will make these announcements. But to answer the question, has it been successful? Yes, it has been. There are some areas or some of the sectors that have not necessarily used up the entire amount that was allocated. And we do believe that the government will repurpose that and also expand the support that would be provided. And the sectors are some, like we mentioned, furniture, leather, toys, and footwear. So these are four sectors that I would, and even on the container space, there's an ask. So these 4, 5 sectors, I would expect some more support going forward, if not in the budget very soon thereafter. But the budget will certainly have some announcements on where we are and how things are going on the PLI front.
What could be that announcement? Look, the intention is very clear that government wants to really kickstart the manufacturing renaissance in India. Now, whether it is PLI or whether it is made in India for India or made in India for the world, the template I think is ready. So, what could be that additional push?
So I think the additional push would be a little bit more on the implementation side because the vision is there. There's absolute clarity and the strategy is there, which is being implemented of not only Make in India for India, but for rest of world, like you talked about. But when we see some anecdotal, data or experiences that are there, looks like the offtake of actual investment in the specified short time frame has not happened in some pockets, and I would expect because the government would also like to see the return sooner than later with all the support being provided, that some tweaks may happen to the scheme to ensure that the company is committing to make the investment do so in a defined time frame, and perhaps they give them a longer period to make a decision to go into the PLI scheme or not. Because what's happening traditionally is this window is reasonably small. Companies would get the benefit or the approval in principle, and then they have a shorter time frame to implement. I think both the timeframes of making a decision as well as when to get off the ground should expand a little bit for even more accelerated growth on the Make in India front.
Policy front, what could be done? Mahesh, I'm trying to understand the specifics here. Like PLI scheme were done with a purpose which enabled the profitability and enabled the path of revenue for companies. What can be done at a policy front in terms of a number, regime, tax rate? What is that missing link according to you?
So two things. One from the PLI policy and the other is the customs, the tax and regulatory framework. On the PLI policy, to actually see the results, to give more specifics, I think, and we've had discussions and understand that the government has mapped out those cases where companies have taken the in-principle approval and not have got off the ground. And we've seen it in some sectors and some pockets. So while technology and the mobile phone space has been a hit, we've seen on the food processing and others, there is not 100% utilization or actual implementation. So from a policy standpoint, I expect some changes that we will have more implementation focus where there's a commitment there. Perhaps an exit load, if you choose to abort after taking an in-principle approval, could be something that is looked at. The second part, which I think is a very budget-focused area, which we would expect, and that's a trend, that you very often, every budget will have a customs changes on those products that the government has identified to give impetus to increase manufacturing. And therefore, what you will see is duty changes where there'll be lower rate of duties on the components and subcomponents so that you have not only at a last mile of manufacture, but the whole 9 yards of manufacture. So I would, as a betting guy, expect and hope that the budget will again have customs changes in these PLI sectors where a lot of impetus and amount of investment has been parked aside, support of the investment has been parked aside by the government for industry.
So we've already seen schemes worth what about 2 lakh crores for 14 sectors under PLI. That's the
Correct.
analysis that we've done, and I hope I've got it right over here. So having said that, so your big expectation is maybe, if I've got it right, duty tweaks, including customs duty and more sectors.
That's right. That's correct. And let's not forget the, in addition to the 2 lakh crore, the semiconductor announcement is another important one, very recent, 80,000 crores or 76,000 crores to be precise. I think that is also on the journey to the 1 trillion digital economy goals that the government has set for FY 2025. And that is not necessarily linked to the volume of the sale. It is linked to the capital outlay, and the minimum is 20,000 crores per unit. So I would expect that traction of push on the digital and the economy, if I were to call on the electronic product space, to continuously increase, Nansa.
When one talks to industry, the two talking points that they also have is, you touched upon implementation, and within implementation, if we could see what the late Arun Jaitley used to talk about as federal competition cooperation, because which state will get which PLI scheme, how is that going to be implemented? That seems to be one missing part. And the second, the actual benefits of the PLI scheme. So it's okay to say we want more sectors, but until one starts seeing the money trickling in and the companies who've already won make money, will that not also dampen sentiment?
True. I'll take the first one as an interesting dimension, because if you rewind back in time, even pre-GST, the central schemes which were encouraging manufacture in hill states, in Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal, amongst other states, that was also location specific. What the PLI scheme has done is that they made it, in a way, location agnostic. There is, like our Honorable Finance Minister had said, there should be some healthy incentivization by the states. But if you look at the brass tacks and implementation, thanks to GST, you really can't have a state VAT or a GST benefit. But you do have states having clear state industrial policies, having goals and investment, programs. And to me, the investment messaging by the states is moved away from a pure fiscal one to also talking about ecosystem related support, whether on the electricity infrastructure, ease of doing their business and things like that. And of course, there is benefits in relation to land as well, which is a very important component. But the level playing field is more in terms of keeping the incentive, the financial PLI aside or GST aside, and the other important factors on decision making on investment come into play in making a decision between state A and state B. On the second point, yes, there is a little bit of, I would say, not nervousness, but a little bit of a concern that why is not the investment commitments not fully met? There are some sectors which have been met pretty well, and like I said, we have the hits are the phone sector, the pharma sector, the auto, ACC, and food are somewhere there. I think the government is indeed looking and has been spending time with industry to understand what are the teething troubles to get off the ground. Do you need an extension for the investment that you committed? I think that collaboration will continue, and my sense would be at some stage they may also bring in an exit load saying, if you do not bring in at a defined time frame, this is the consequence. So companies will take that commitment a little bit more seriously. But I do think companies have been very excited. The excitement is on, but it's just that the time frame to get things done or implement has been a slight challenge, which I hope to see a small change in this budget or soon thereafter.
Okay. Mahesh, so let's wrap it up with a success story. Let's say a success story is Apple. A success story is toy exports. A success story is automobile exports, pharma exports. A lot of the other sectors somehow have failed to replicate that. For example, textile.
Correct.
Bangladesh exports more than India. Vietnam exports more than India. Second, to a large extent, I would also imagine there is very little success story in IT hardware. there is very little success story in a lot of other, engineering product categories. Why is that auto, which is a product of engineering, has done well and other engineering companies have failed?
I'll give you one simple data point with numbers in terms of rather than thing. Really, auto also has two parts to it. One, which the incentives that the government has given, but the duty arbitrage for a fully finished vehicle could be 100% or 60%, depending on the size of the vehicle, versus the components being as low as 10 to 15%. So when you look at the duty arbitrage, it's pretty wide. So there is a carrot in terms of certain incentive and an overall investment. There's also, in a way, a disincentive by virtue of saying if you do not substitute, import substitution, then there is a huge customs duty bill. Come to IT hardware. India is a signatory to the WTO's Information Technology Agreement, where we have 217 items, where the basic customs duty is committed and signed up to be nil. So the government has had a challenge that for a server or a networking equipment, they cannot bring in a customs duty on the finished product, and there cannot be a component level duty. So what that does is that doesn't enable the government to have an alternate method to encouraging manufacture by virtue of having a duty arbitrage. I know the government has been reviewing this position, but this is something that is a dynamic, which is an important factor to me as to why IT hardware in specific has not taken off the ground. And I think on textile, it's been very slow from the sectors. I think all have done either moderately well or mobile phone, pharma excellently well. I think on textile, it is a bit of a gap, and it has to do with a larger ecosystem thing, which may take some more time, is my assessment.
Thank you, Mahesh, for joining in and putting all of those details into perspective as to whether or not down the line we can see domestic manufacturing actually becoming globally competitive and what kind of sweeteners we can see for the PLI scheme.